wanna see you. I don't wanna hear you tonight.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I've finally picked up the Corvas Prime. Now, I almost never cover Archguns, but it's been a while since we've gotten a new one. This one is pretty decent. I've been told that the Corvas Prime can't hit the legs of the Profit Taker properly, so watch out for that, as Profit Taker is the main draw of where to bring these big guns. But what about normal play? We don't have that many Archguns that are viable there, and even more so due to most buffs not applying to them. So what sets Corvas Prime apart? First of all, it has had some pretty noticeable buffs over its non-prime variant. It's buffs all around overall, but because it has become a projectile weapon, that means the one niche Bing Shilling Chroma setup it could use previously is no longer functional. In exchange, the Corvas has become much better at everything in normal play. The primed variant has gained Archiplasmor-like characteristics as seen on the Stropha, Tenet Agendis' heavy attack, Queller's alt-fire shot, and Nadaruk's charge shots most recently. What's interesting is the hitbox is actually larger than it looks, easily hitting enemies above, below, and to the side of the visible projectile. This is important because it makes it extremely easy to land headshots by shooting over enemy heads. And unlike all other archetype weapons, it actually has a 2x headshot multiplier. The only other weapon in the category like this is Queller. What else is new? The Corvas Prime has higher crit chance, crit damage, and status, and unlike the non-prime, gets bonus stats on the charge shot as well besides just more damage. The actual baseline damage values are also higher on the prime variant. These stat bumps are enough to make this weapon actually viable in normal play. Curiously, the Corvas Prime also has infinite body punch through on both fire modes, which is something the original Corvas lacked. You may be thinking of some fancy magnetize or bullet attractor strats as soon as I said infinite body punch through. Well, you're short of luck. This weapon cannot re-hit enemies like the Tenet Plasmor. Enemies can only be hit once by the shot, so trapping shots won't result in more damage, and it doesn't have an infinite projectile lifespan like the Nadaruk either. But that doesn't mean the weapon can't perform. There's a very big buff that DE did by changing the pellet-based shotgun of the non-prime to a slug shot on the prime, and bumping up the status chance all the way up to 30%, each status proc now does way more damage and is more likely to proc said big status effect. How's that different than proccing a lot of the weaker status effects? Well, for statuses that have a 10 stack cap, getting the most bang for your buck from a single proc is super important, and being able to deliver that one hit as a full headshot helps a lot compared to shotgun spread. This might give you an idea on where things are going today. As a forewarning, no, I'm not trying to create the next top meta or best setups unless I specifically say so in the video. Most of my videos are to get the most out of a weapon or setup, if you enjoy said weapon or frame enough to get the most out of it. I know that some of the decisions made today may seem counterintuitive because you could get the same performance with other options. But that's the thing, we're going for the best we can do with Corvas, for people who want to play Corvas. So let's delve into the world of Corvas Prime together. What holds Archguns back normally? They don't benefit from elemental augments. This means Shock Trooper, Smite Infusion, Nourish, Freeze Force, Fireball Frenzy all don't work on them. Toxic Lash does, Zadis Whisper does, Volt Shields you shoot through do, but most importantly, stuff like Vex Armor and Amp from Octavia do. Archguns cannot use Weapon Arcanes and lag galvanized mods, meaning their maximum damage output is what you mod onto them. They do not get any better in mission after kills. There is also only one actually significant base damage mod for Archguns, so their base damage is always lacking. This is where we need extreme scaling today, either through insane base damage or other external multipliers, as Archguns can't use Bane mods and you can only get it from Rivens. As always, we won't be using Rivens today, but that's the reason why Corvus Bane stat lines are so valuable for Profit Taker, since there's no other way to get it on them. Our first showcase is Zephyr. This one should be a bit obvious, and I'm sure you all know how strong Zephyr is by now. But this is an interesting case, because it gives us exactly what we want in an Archgun build. Archguns have no scaling mods, meaning the tornadoes give us the massive multipliers we want to spread damage in an AoE, while also inflicting further stacks of our very high single hit damage on the prime slug shot. In fact, Corvas Prime reaches way over 200% crit chance with this build on her due to passive applying to all weapons, including Archguns, while in the air. The uncharged shot reaches 199% crit chance with her passive and Arcane Avenger up, and 241% crit chance of using the charge shot. You won't need the charge shot since the tornadoes are so strong, but if you do want to use it for the 2x base damage and bonus crit and status, don't hold and shoot it. hold and switch to operator instead. Going to operator on a charged shot weapon automatically fires it when it's full. This is important because it will bypass the stagger of Archgun charge shots, letting you shoot again sooner. But more importantly, and the new Matter Eye Focus update that we're getting, there's a node called Power Transfer that grants both our operator and Warframe plus 100% crit damage whenever you transference for 20 seconds. That fits perfectly on the setup with the operator swap playstyle if you want to use the charge shot. The rest of the build is pretty ordinary. I Helminth over a 1, but that's from an old build. You can use whatever you want, even Roar if you want double dip scaling in the procs of the tornadoes, but I would recommend Dispensary so you have a reliable way to get Archgun ammo back, without relying on the rare drops from elite mobs. A massive range so we can drag enemies over with air bursts as needed and then pulled into the tornadoes, and also creating a massive deflection shield with turbulence. A bit of duration keeps the tornadoes lasting for quite a while, and energized alongside flow will be able to sustain our ability usage. Besides, you always have Rolling Guard if you screw up. Recasting Tornado will fully regenerate your shields and Natural Talent will speed that up lots. Peculiar Growth is the flex mod, put whatever you want here. The kills you get from shooting Corvas into the tornadoes will self-damage combat discipline, which will trigger Arcane Avenger for 45% flat crit that does work on Archguns as mentioned earlier. Since we're on Archgun setups, you won't be able to use your primary or pistol or anything really unless you holster it, which we don't want to do because it'll give it a fat cooldown. So your primary will function as an Amalgam Serration stat stick for the extra sprint speed, and the pistol will function as an Augur stat stick for the set bonus. Focus School can be whatever you want, but like I said, Matter Eye will be handy for power transfer once the update drops to bump up the Archgun power a bit more. Pet is your standard Panzer with viral quills to reliably spread viral for us since we can't use anything except Corvas Prime. Since that here is kind of useless, this is just generic builds, though if you use Equilibrium instead of the Peculiar mod on Zephyr, you can get a bunch of health orbs to convert into energy this way, Devolution for infinite cat lives, and Martyr for a health gate stopgap that has a 30-second cooldown, Radar, and finally Vacuum. The Corvus itself, we're building for gas. The weapon is innate heat so we can get it with just one 60/60 mod. This is important because it opens up another slot, which is where we fit all these other mods on. Critical Focus gives crit chance and crit damage despite the misleading wording. Automatic Trigger is the preferred fire rate mod here instead of Archgun A since you won't be able to get headshots reliably when enemies are ragdolled in tornadoes. Multi-shot as always despite the mod being weak, and Sabbath rounds is the only other flex mod for quality of life for terrain punch through if walls and bunkers or bulwarks get in the way. You don't really need more damage on this setup anyways. 1 to 2 shots is all you need to kill everything in the tornado. It's a pretty simple build. You just find some semi-open space, set up tornadoes, and camp. Spam airbursts as needed to pull enemies inwards into the 10-meter AoE ragdoll, pull radius of the tornadoes, keep turbulence up to deflect bullets from you. Just watch out for AoEs though, as they can still hit you. The massive base damage and huge crits from the slugs of Corvus will fuel into the tornadoes, which multiplies crits by a further 2 times and regurgitate those hits as single tornado AoEs in an area that also procs more gas up to the 10 times cap. If you for some reason want to use this against Demolist instead, well, you only get your Archgun and can't use Masterlock, so bring Seeking Shuriken instead. And then use Funnel Clouds to set up a million tornadoes to multiply your damage on the Demolist and let your spam shots fly. What if you want a more normal build though? The golden standard has always been Chroma for Archguns, and what I can give you too. Chroma gives you all the base damage you will ever need. If you run and gun, you can take a big corrosive Corvas Prime and bring Dispensary as the Helminth. If you want some even bigger big dick DPS, you can run Ensnare and take the Gas Corvus setup. Although these weapons will have slightly different setups, you'll see once again we have Combat Discipline and Arcane Avenger to self-damage and force proc the crits needed to get our Corvus to reliable orange crits. Energized with Flow and Equilibrium should be enough to offset the 45 efficiency by using Panzer's synth-set health orb synergy, so that we can still take Matter Eye Focus School for the new power transfer node instead of Zeneric. We have a sizable amount of range on this build for Ensnare, but you wouldn't need this if you're going Dispensary. The Dispensary setup would run narrow-minded instead of Stretch and probably Augur Secrets instead of Augur Reach. The concept is simple. Vex Armor gives you the massive base damage Archguns need, which is normally filled by Gun Seal and Weapon Arcanes on normal weapons. Still bring a primary weapon for Amalgam Serration stat stick and pistol for Augur weapons for better shield gating. You have a choice of whatever you want for the Elemental Ward, be it Toxin for faster reloads or Cold for damage deflect. This time Panzer is super important to maintain the energy economy, as Equilibrium will be able to make use out of all those health orbs the Sunset makes, and will be able to pick up even at full HP. Typical Devolution for infinite lives, Martyr for health gate, radar, and vacuum. You can always bring Operator Arcanes like Megas Elevate to counter the health drain from Combat Discipline as well, and will be useful in all builds today since self-damage will be prevalent everywhere. The Corvas doesn't have any base damage this time, as we have Vex armor. We've also dropped a 60/60 Toxin mod. Instead, we're building full corrosive with 120s. This is the way to go if you don't want to use Ensnare and pick Dispensary instead. Though if you are using Ensnare, then I would recommend this last build, which is backed as a 60/60 Toxin and primed Rubido line barrel. It isn't much, but allows you to still get kills even if Vex armor isn't up yet. Remember, gas doesn't scale up element percent, so adding more elementals won't help gas on the build. Sabbath rounds once again helps bypass map geometry despite the weapon having infinite body punch through already. On both builds, we take Archgun Ace this time, since it should be super easy to land headshots by shooting slightly above their heads, and we get 50% fire rate instead of the 60, which is barely a difference, but also charge rate bonus, say if you want to use a charge shot too, which is separate on Archguns than fire rate by the way as a stat, and a stat that automatic trigger doesn't affect, while also hounding our reload to just 1 second. If you use the charge fire mode, remember you can use Operator to bypass the self stagger. Regardless of the build you take, both handle really well in Steel Path. You just go around ensnaring or directly shooting enemies. The infinite body punch through should make quick work of your enemies, and Dispensary will let you go forever on the corrosive setup, whereas the gas setup with Ensnare may or may not run out of ammo depending on how many refills the heavier enemies drop. In theory, you could use this setup on any frame with Ensnare, but you will lose the massive Vex armor base damage scaling. An interesting alternative to Chroma today is Octavia. She has more survivability by being able to go invisible with her 3. But most importantly, the multi-shot buff from Metronome also applies to Archguns, helping a much needed stat get over 2.0 bullets per shot for a massive TPS boost and accessible massive base damage buff. Yes, her 4, Amp, is a base damage buff, not a multiplier like Eclipse that the tooltip suggests. It's additive instead. While the Chroma setup gave 698% Vex armor, this Octavia only gives 476 base damage if you're using Umbral Intensify. But we also get that spicy 71.4% multi-shot buff that you will eventually proc naturally by just shooting Corvas. Building on the modded 1.6 multi-shot, this buff alone brings a 44.6% total damage increase, making Octavia, once you factor in the Amp base damage buff as well, actually stronger than Chroma here, while offering more quality of life. The 235 range means your Amp has a 32.9 meter radius, which is the majority of a given tile. Your Mallet will also aggro enemies over to you, letting you pick between engaging aggressively or camping enemies to their deaths, up to you. But this setup rewards an active Octavia playstyle, and leaves your 2 open for Helminth. I would recommend Dispensary for infinite ammo on your Archgun. Besides that, this entire loadout functions identical to the Chroma one, so I don't think we need to go over the rest of the loadout concerning stat stick weapons. For Amalgam Serration or Augur mods, focus school on Matarai or Xenarch choices, or the Corvas build for gas or corrosive. And our final character in the spotlight today is Lavos. A bit unexpected, am I right? Well, this is definitely a very odd Lavos build. We need all of his abilities, and we're subsuming off, wait for it, his 4. This is probably an abomination to many of you, but remember what I said at the start of the video. We're not looking for the best possible Lavos build. We're looking for the best Corvus synergy if we pick Lavos, and this is it. Why Lavos? Because of its 3. Transmutation Probe, both CCs and Primes enemies, while also converting all ammo drops into universal ammo drops, which is important to sustain our Corvas Prime. Why did I choose to keep his 2 then? Because we can't prime normally when you have Archguns out. Keeping his 1 and 2 lets you combine both of them by holding these abilities down to infuse your next ability cast of his native abilities with Viral. Read, this won't work on Ensnare. We'll be using his 1 to do this because it also has Lifesteal, which will make up for the self-damage inflicted by Combat Discipline to trigger Arcane Avenger. Because we want to prime enemies every time we blow them up for maximal effect, we will always be casting Ophidian Bite for the Viral Prime after Ensnare, meaning we are guaranteed to trigger Swift Bite on the group of enemies, Natural Talent for even faster ability casts, and Arcane Eruption on the side to make up for Lavos being unable to shield gate normally. Rolling Guard is our final stopgap to help us set up with that as well. Besides, you always have the option of going Operator to give yourself more breathing room. The X-List slot on Lavos is a little bit of a freebie. I chose Prime Sure-Footed here so that no matter what, even if your passive doesn't proc, you will still have immunity to knockdowns. But keep in mind his passive Valence block does give you all status immunity for a couple of seconds whenever you pick up orbs, and you will always be able to pick up orbs due to the synth set, whether it is health orbs, energy orbs, or universal orbs. Perhaps Cunning Drift can give you a tiny bit of little extra range if you so want. For Lavos, the primary weapon will still be an Amalgam Serration Sprint Speed stat stick. The pistol though, since he doesn't use energy, he will not get shields back by casting them, and thus Augur sets don't do anything. Our companion, we will still use the same Panzer build as I mentioned earlier because this just suits all scenarios. But the synth set, while it only drops health orbs from pen assists, your 3 transmutation probe can turn these into universal orbs. Universal orbs are also treated as energy orbs and will trigger arcane eruption, giving you even more CC to make up for lack of shield gating. Viral quills will also help you spread more status as a stopgap if you miss casting the Ophidian Bite on the group of enemies. Martyr for health gate stopgaps, which will be crucial since you can't fully rely on shield gate on Lavos, and Devolution for infinite cat lives, Tech Assault to dodge lethal hits, and the typical radar and vacuum. For the Lavos loadout, we're using the third Corvas build I showed earlier, the gas variant that Chroma could also use. In truth, this is literally the same as the Zephyr or basic Ensnare one, but uses Archgun Ace instead of automatic trigger, as you will be able to land headshots easily with Ensnare. Just a tiny bit of variability here, because getting headshots, like I said, will upkeep the buff indefinitely. This build performs quite well and is very comfy. I tried to keep Lavos duration near neutral since it does affect the status duration on the gas clouds we produce. Alternatively, you could drop Augur Reach and only run Cunning Drift in the X list and slot in Augur Message instead too. While I didn't have slots to max it out, 95% currently is more than enough to make sure the clouds are able to rip enemies apart. The constant CC from Eruption, Transmutation Probe, and Ensnare should hopefully be enough to maintain decent survivability. You can also resort to Vazarin if you really want to, since Protective Dash will still exist after the update. These are the best ways I could showcase Corvas Prime. Pretty fun, am I right? Even though it doesn't have Galvanized mods or Weapon Arcanes. What do you think? Is it enough to make it viable in normal play? If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet, subscribe. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I try my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the new augments, Garuda's rework, and upcoming Angels of Zerimoth. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.